Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to our / IDontWorkHereLady, where people are so entitled, they assume everyone is meant to serve them. And in today's episode, we've got Karens losing their jobs, attacking people's children, assuming 12-year-olds are maids. It's wild. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. So I work at a college, not as a teacher or teacher's assistant, but as a Dynamics 365 specialist. So I'm in the IT department, but I'm not the guy who comes to your desk to fix your computer. I'm an expert in a specific system. This means that while I do work here, I do not work here. Where here is the desktop services team, and this is relevant because one day, I'm at work in the IT office and I hear a knock on the door. And for reference, the actual area we work in is on the second floor of a building. The other floors are used for storage, and there's a single staircase that connects them. At the bottom of the staircase is an access-controlled door. If you don't have a code, you're not getting in. So I get up, lock my PC, head downstairs, and open the door. I'm faced with some random teacher, the Karen of our story, and she's holding a laptop. She then aggressively shoves it at me, and she says, "This is broken. Fix it or give me a new one. Do it now." My response is the classic, "I'm sorry, I'm not part of the desktop services team. If you'd like to leave me the ticket number for the ticket you've raised, then I'll get one of the technicians to contact you when they get back." And this is the point where the teacher engages Karen mode. She screams at me and says, "Give me a new computer. You IT people, you're all so lazy. All you do is sit around and do nothing all day. We know you always lie to us." The woman just goes on, and I stop listening. I then respond with a repetition of the previous statement, and when she doesn't listen, I just close the door on her. And this is where it gets really fun. Her response is to throw the laptop at the door. Laptop 0, door 1. She then shouts that she's friends with the head of the IT department and she'll get me fired as she storms off. So I pull out my phone and I call my boss. I explain what just happened and I ask her what I should do. My boss then asks me if the asset tag on the laptop is still in the wreckage by the door. Happily, I respond it is. This lets us find out who is the person responsible for the laptop. Long story short, my boss talks to Karen's boss and she gets fired for gross misconduct and destruction of company property. And the funny thing is, it was all caught on video, and I and a few other coworkers had a great laugh about it. Well, that escalated very quickly, and honestly, I would have never expected a college professor to act like that. I just don't know how Karen thought that was gonna play out in the end. Like, there is no world where you can rage, throw a laptop at someone, and have them go, "Oh, you've made your point. Here's a brand new laptop." But yeah, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and today's parting gift is unemployment caused by severe idiocy and rage issues. So this story doesn't fit with the retail environment, but I've noticed a theme of deserving entitled folk receiving their karmic comeuppance, so I submit this for your consideration. Years ago, when I was attending Naval Nuclear Power School in Orlando, my best friend and I were involved in an incident at the Navy Exchange on base. It was payday, so after class, my best friend and I head to the exchange to cash our checks and to pick up a few things. The exchange was a part of a cluster of shops with a covered area connecting them. With the blazing Florida sun that day, there was quite a crowd gathered in the shaded area. As we were headed for the door of the exchange, we saw a well-dressed, late middle-aged woman carrying a large number of packages, trying to get through the door. Now, why she didn't have a cart for the packages, I have no clue. My best friend and I each grab a side of the double doors and we open them up for her. Just as she's coming through the door, a lieutenant comes charging through, nearly knocking her off her feet and sending her packages flying. The lieutenant joins a cluster of other junior officers, having a BS session. I catch the woman's arm to steady her, and once she's regained her balance, I run to get a shopping cart, while my best friend gathers up the packages. When I return a moment later, we put all of our packages in the cart and present it to the woman. She gives us a huge smile and thank you. My best friend is a bit of a smart mouth, and he sees that the offending lieutenant is still BSing with his buddies. My best friend then pitches his voice loud enough that he's sure the lieutenant will hear, and he says, "Our pleasure, ma'am. Some of us don't require an act of Congress to be gentlemen." Even though I'm laughing at this verbal barb, alarm bells are sounding in my head. Well, sure enough, the lieutenant has indeed heard, and he's striding our way, red-faced and breathing fire. My best friend and I pop to attention, and the guy proceeds to ream us each a new one, and he's giving it all he's got. And I must admit, his command of profanity was impressive, and coming from a sailor, that's saying something. So during his tirade, I noticed that the lady we assisted has pushed her cart over to another small group of officers. She's talking to them and pointing in our direction. One of the officers detaches himself from the group and he comes striding over. And I swear I had never seen as many gold braids on a hat in my life. And his shoulder boards have 2 stars. It's the base commanding officer. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, we're done for now. It's at this point, my best friend and I are starting to reach for the IDs and getting ready to be put on report. The commanding officer then looks at my best friend and me and he says, "Gentlemen, thank you for assisting my wife. You may go now." We snap out salutes and a brisk "yes sir" and beat feet into the exchange. We look back through the glass wall to see the lieutenant standing at a very rigid attention, while the admiral reduces him to a quivering puddle. I don't know what happened after that, but it's likely that he had very limited advancement potential and wasn't very happy with the choices of duty stations he had available to him. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that man's career is over. Like, there is no way you're moving up in rank after that. There is nothing more satisfying than power-tripping idiots getting destroyed by someone who's in a higher position, and I can only imagine the dressing down that lieutenant got. And I wish OP stayed for the show. Like, body checking the commanding officer's wife, holy moly. And this is why you always have to be nice to people on base. You never know who it is you're talking to. Excellent karmic justice. So this happened recently while I was at JFK. Me and a few of my childhood friends have been planning on going on a 2-week trip to Europe for years. We hadn't actually gone because, until recently, most of them were in college and I was working full-time. I'm actually a pilot, which was a part of the problem. So this was our first big opportunity. I'll go ahead and set up the cast. It's me, the security officer, the Karen, and I'll call her Mary, Karen's really embarrassed daughter. So at first, it was a fairly normal trip to the airport. For me, airports aren't as stressful as I generally have the run of the place, mostly due to my known crew badge with my picture and the airline I work for. That lets me pass TSA with some ease and go to the pilot areas. So while my friends are waiting in line, I walk to the side and show my badge to the TSA guy with the wand, and he begins scanning me. I actually get through without much issue and turn to wait for my friends. That's when I see Karen staring directly at me. We make eye contact, and she waves me over. Karen's in the TSA line, not far enough along to take her shoes off. And I can't walk up behind TSA, and I didn't want to go back through TSA. So I shake my head, not wanting to call out to her. But as soon as I do that, I can see her face getting red. At this point, it's worth noting that I don't look close to an employee. I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt, quite literally a Lipton Ice t-shirt. And aside from my badge and my travel bag, I look nothing like a pilot. Seeing my non-compliance, Karen immediately starts to shout, "What do you mean no? You can't say no to me." And hearing her scream out of nowhere, the TSA officer who wanted me walks to her, asking her to calm down. But Karen keeps shouting. She says, "Don't you tell me to do anything. My son is a platinum flyer and he got me my tickets. You need to do what I say." While I stand there confused, the TSA officer asks her to step out of line, and she pulls poor Mary along with her. Karen looks as if she's won a great victory, and she begins striking past the TSA officer towards me. The officer stops her, and she turns on him and says, "Oh, so you're playing favorites now. You'll let some stupid employee walk through like he owns the place, and you step on customers, but not me, not a platinum flyer." The officer looks fed up, and I can't blame him. But he waves me over with a sad expression, and then he explains, "Look, he's a crewman. He flies for one of the airlines. That's why he gets to go past." I then held up my badge for her to see it. And Karen, looking at me with her platinum hair fury, says, "So you do work here and you still try to ignore me. I'll make sure you lose your job and your license for this. That is no way to treat a customer." And before I can get 2 words out, she stops me and says, "I don't want to hear a word from you if it's not the name of your supervisor." I tell her I don't work here, I fly for this airline and I'm on vacation. Karen continues flipping out and she says, "You just admitted you work here and yet you still ignored me. Where's your manager?" Luckily for me, Mary was starting to get fed up with her mom and she tried to cut in. But Karen ignores her while she's yelling about her son and how he'd get me fired as he's a platinum flyer. At this point, I really hadn't gotten in much of a word, but I didn't really need to, because Mary finally got a word in on her mother's mindless rant. Mary says to her mom, "Mom, stop. We're going to get in line quietly and wait our turn before they kick us out of the airport and we won't fly at all today. I will leave you behind." This did shut her up, and I took my opportunity to walk away as fast as I could. Don't you just love it when kids have more sense than their parents? And guys, I always say this, like, if the person has nothing to do with you, just keep walking. Like, there was no reason for Opie to waste his time dealing with that Karen who kept flaunting her son's stupid platinum status or whatever. Super entitled. This person comments, "I'm a flight attendant, and I don't live in the same city I work out of, so my commute is a plane ride from Virginia to Boston." Now, most airlines have what we call interline agreements, so if there's open seats on a flight, we're allowed to get on for free to travel to or from work. I take advantage of this as a lot of my airline only has 1 flight a day between my base and home. That means I'm often in my uniform because I don't have time to change into regular clothes. Obviously, every airline has different uniforms. My uniform is purple. A few weeks ago, I was traveling home on an airline with navy blue and red uniforms. I was one of the last 10 to board, so there wasn't much bag space left. I had put my bag way at the back of the plane, but my seat was towards the front. I decided to stay in the back until everyone was on, so I wouldn't be fighting my way back to the front. This is when a lady walks right past the working flight attendants, and she stopped like 2 rows in front of where I was standing, and she starts screaming at me how she had to check her bag when there's space for it right there. This is when I say to her, "I'm sorry ma'am, I actually don't work for this airline, I'm just catching a ride." She continued yelling how I needed to go get her bag and tell the agent there was room for it on the plane. I said again, "Ma'am, I do not work for the airline, I can't help you. You need to ask one of the working flight attendants." She says, "No, I'm asking you. You're in your uniform and I know you know how these things work. I'm a VIP Gold Diamond Sparkle Unicorn member and I should not have had to check my bag." I didn't say anything else, I just stared at her for like 10 seconds while she just continued screaming for me to go get her bag. And then I walked right on by and went back to my seat. A part of me wishes I looked back because I'm sure she was making the Pikachu meme face. This happened when I was 12 years old, and I had to share it with you and your listeners. We were invited to attend a Chinese wedding dinner by one of our distant relatives in a neighboring country. Most of these relatives have never seen me before. We were in the ballroom of this fancy Chinese restaurant, and I was seated at a ballroom table. Now, because there wasn't enough space for my family to sit at just one table, I volunteered to sit at another table with my sister, with a group of old ladies and cousins. We began feasting on the duck, crabs, and all of the standard fare of an 8-course wedding dinner. This is when I noticed that one of those unfriendly-looking old ladies was frowning at me, and she seemed increasingly annoyed for whatever reason. Out of the blue, she points at me and says, "You! Go outside over there and get me a cup of water." She then said something to the rest of the table and she was scowling at me. Now, I was also dumbfounded by the sudden command, seeing there were so many waitresses around. I was about to say something, but then she screeches, "Hurry up, you're useless." Now, I was somewhat dark-skinned for a Chinese girl, and I was quite tall and lanky for my age. My sister, on the other hand, was fair-skinned and baby-faced. Hence, I probably looked like one of those live-in domestic helpers taking care of a young child. And being only 12, I raised my hand, took her glass, and then asked a waitress if she could get more water. The waitress comes over, and Karen says to the waitress, "Don't you dare get the water. Maids nowadays are so rude. Don't they know they're supposed to be doing their jobs and not sitting here eating?" She then turns to the table where my immediate family was sitting, and she asked aloud, "Whose maid is this? Yours? Tell her to go sit somewhere else. I don't want to be looking at her all night." Hearing her say that, I slammed my chopsticks down, and word by word, I spat out, "I am not a maid, you idiot." Hearing that, you could see the color drain from her face as everyone turned to stare at her in silent admonishment. The woman spent the rest of the dinner staring down into her lap and eating quietly. That is such disgusting, entitled behavior, right? And honestly, I hope OP's parents and their relatives never let her live that down. And seriously, even if OP was a live-in maid, why the mega disrespect, right? Like, don't you sit here. I don't want to see you while I'm eating. And guys, I've had the displeasure of meeting people like this in my life, and you can't help but to want to smack these people for being so rude. This happened over the weekend with me and my youngest son. Now let me describe my youngest son. He's 13 years old, just under 6 feet tall, and 180 pounds. Size-wise, he's an adult, but once you look at him, he's still baby-faced, very little facial hair, and it's obvious he's a child. He's also very shy and quiet around strangers. He's wearing a hoodie with his school name on the front, basketball shorts, and sandals. We're at the local hardware store picking up some items he needs for his shop class project. I'm standing by the cart and texting with my youngest daughter while he's picking out various things he needs. This is when an elderly gentleman walks up and he says, "Son, can you reach the top shelf there and get this down for me?" And since it's right above his head, my son does as asked and he puts it in the man's cart. The man says to him, "Thank you, Sonny. Here's $1 for being a good kid and helping an old man out." My son says to him, "You don't have to do that," and he tries to give it back. The old man says, "No, son, you're here with your mama and I interrupted y'all. Go ahead and keep it." My son thanks him and we're on our way. Standing in the checkout line, my son remembers he forgot an item. It's only 2 aisles over, so he shuffles off to get it. The line was plenty long, so he had time. I'm just standing in line, scrolling my phone, when out of nowhere I hear my son's distressed voice calling, "Mom." This was akin to a wounded cub calling for his mama. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and off I go in search of my son. Mama Radar takes me straight to him, where this raggedy-ass woman had her hand on my son's wrist, and she's yelling at him saying, "Help me find this item." At this point, my son hasn't seen me yet, and he yells "Mom" even louder. The raggedy-ass woman tells my son to shut up. His mom isn't here to save him. This is when I loudly say, "Oh yes, she is, and you need to take your hand off my son before I rip your hand off of you." The woman says, "If he's your son, you need to teach him some manners." Now, my son is big enough that he could have removed her hand from him, but he doesn't like confrontation. He quietly says, "I told you I was shopping with my mom. I don't work here." He then tries to step away, and she yanks him back. She then yells at him and says, "I saw you helping that old man." To which my son replied, "Because he asked nicely and it was right above my head." By now, this mama bear is enraged and she's seeing red that this woman won't leave my son alone. I repeat to her that she has 10 seconds to remove her hand and walk away before I use my legal right to protect my child and remove it for her. I start counting 10, 9, 8. She then screams at me and says, "What do you think you're gonna do?" I tell her, when I get down to 1, it's self-defense and I'm gonna beat your ass for assaulting my minor child. The woman keeps spewing nonsense at me. Meanwhile, the counter's going 3, 2, 1. And yes, at this point, I grab her wrist, twist it behind her back, and threw her to the floor. This all happens so quickly, and a few floor associates come running over. I see them and tell them to call the police because I'm pressing charges as she put her hands on my son. That's assault of a minor in this state. Long story short, the police were called, and both of us were put in handcuffs while they took statements and reviewed the cameras. The woman ends up being arrested, and the officer uncuffed me, telling me I was free to go. You know what? That Karen is lucky that all OP did was grab her and throw her down, because some mama bears wouldn't even give a countdown, right? Some people would just start swinging, no questions asked, especially when it's clear their 13-year-old is in distress. That said though, a school hoodie, shorts, and sandals, Karen, come on. Like, she almost deserves to be taken away for being incredibly not smart, and that's putting it super duper nicely. This took place many years ago, and I'm happy to be able to share this funny moment. I was 30 years old, skinny, and pretty, in a fairly wholesome sort of way, all of which is relevant to the story. I had gone through a difficult breakup, with the result that I'd spend a year renting rooms in a couple of different house shares. Finally, the time came where I could have my own place again, and I was really excited. I had found an attic flat in a large house that was converted into 4 apartments, and it was absolutely perfect. I shared an entrance with the flat below, but no worries because we each had our own intercom. I had briefly met my neighbor, a slightly eccentric middle-aged lady who seemed to value her privacy, and it all seemed too good to be true. Over the next few weeks though, I start to wonder about her. She seemed to have a lot of visitors, some of whom I'd meet on the stairs at all hours of the day. Occasionally, she would open her door to my visitors as they came up the stairs, which was a bit odd. Still, she was a good neighbor, and she was obsessed with security, so it worked well for me. One sunny day, I was heading down to the local coffee shop, and as I left the building, I saw a bloated, sweaty man standing outside the entrance, fiddling with his phone. I smiled politely and went on my way. I was halfway down the drive when I heard Sweaty Man talk. He said, "Excuse me." I turn around and say, "Hello, can I help?" At this point, I should say that I was wearing a long denim skirt and a modest top. It was an outfit that one could easily wear to church, and in fact, I had done on several occasions. Now back to the story. The man says to me, "Do you do home visits?" I ask him, "What do you mean?" He then says to me with urgency, "Do you do home visits?" Now, despite all the church going, 30-year-old me was very streetwise, and in an instant, everything fell into place. I realized what was happening, so I say politely, "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." The guy says, "But you work here." Me extremely politely say, "Work here? What on earth do you mean? I live here in the top flat." The sweaty man at this point backs up, muttering apologies and fluttering his arms around awkwardly. I just said a cheery goodbye and went on my merry way for my almond latte, feeling ickily flattered. And that, my friends, is how I discovered that I lived above a brothel. I moved out 6 months later. Yeah, it sucks that Opie had to leave her perfect home, but I can see getting harassed by random men all the time not only being potentially dangerous, but annoying as heck. But imagine that, moving into a place and not knowing that right under you is a brothel. I bet Opie's got some wild stories while living there. This happened about 2 years ago, and it's a wholesome one for you. I was in a local pop culture store, looking at some of the new products with my headphones on, when I was bumped into by a cart. It wasn't hard, but it made me look up. I see a woman who looked to be in her late 70s, leaning heavily on her cart. The woman clearly had shopping fatigue. When she noticed that she had pushed the cart into me, she apologized and straightened up. This is when her 50-something daughter then turned to her, saying she had no clue what she was looking at, and that she was thinking that maybe she should give up. She sounded upset. Now, we're standing close to the counter, and we're the only customers in the store. The manager was working that day and was staring at the two women. The daughter even shot her a pleading look that was only met with a bored gaze. I knew they wouldn't get help because the manager was a bitch. She liked to test customers to make sure they weren't faking their nerdiness. She liked me because I passed her test when she questioned me about anime. Seeing how disheartened she was, I asked her what she was looking for. The mom tells me I'm looking for some presents for my son, but I don't understand any of this anime stuff. Hearing that, I couldn't help but smile. Growing up, my parents always made fun of me liking anime and comics, so seeing a mom trying to get gifts in this area, even though she doesn't get it, was sweet to me. I say, I'm sure he'll just be happy that you got out of your way to try. She says to me, I did find it odd that a 23-year-old likes this stuff, but if it makes him happy, is it unusual that an adult likes cartoons? I respond, I'm 25 and I like it, so no. Do you want some help though? Do you know what shows he likes? I start pointing out which shows are really popular. I showed them who the main character was and who the fan favorite was, as well as pointing out which products were rare to find elsewhere, and therefore likely to be something the son would enjoy. By this point, the manager tries to add into the conversation, but the grandma and the mom would wait for me to answer their questions instead of the manager. The manager says, we have some great plushies. There's plenty of blah blah blah. This is when I say, some like him. But if you're not sure he's your son's favorite, it's probably best to buy broader stuff. There's some really awesome Dragon Ball Z lights over there. This is when the manager shouts at me and says, you don't even work here. And the mom tells her, maybe you should hire her then. The grandma says, yeah, at least then your customers will get help instead of being stared at. I think we should come back another day to get the stuff you recommended. I don't want this nasty woman getting the credit for the sale. The pissed off look on the manager's face was priceless. Yeah, that sucky manager totally deserved that comment. Like, gatekeeping is not a great way to keep customers. Like hearing that she would quiz customers to make sure they're nerdy enough to buy merchandise, and then ignoring them. Should that person even be a manager? OP even came back to the comments to say that some people would walk in, see that manager working, and then leave. And that says to me, you gotta fire that person. She's terrible for business. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /IDontWorkHereLady. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's in our /malicious compliance episode, where bad bosses are getting absolutely destroyed. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.